My name is Cassy Summers. Welcome to the Curious Universe podcast. Welcome everyone to the show. I have a very special guest here with me today, Miss Marilyn Bradford. I adore you. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you, Cassy. I was thrilled to get the invitation.
You are just this incredible being, and we've actually known each other for a while and had some great conversations. So I'm really excited to explore with you this topic that I've actually never talked about on the show. I realized it's like, is family, and not just family, but undefining family.
Yes.
Yeah. I get the world could look at this, have some different perspectives, and we can offer some tools along the way. But to start off, Marilyn, would you be willing to talk a little bit about how this has shown up for you? What is your family dynamic, and how has it changed over the years as you've kind of explored this?
Well, my family dynamic, I'm old enough that I was born into a very traditional family. Not that that doesn't still exist today. But one thing I wanted to say right at the beginning is that family now does not exist for the same reasons that family began.
Say more.
Family used to be about, if you were a poor person, you had a farm, or a middle-class person, maybe you had a store or a restaurant or a trade, you were a blacksmith or something. Family existed for financial reasons. You needed the children to help on the farm or to help with whatever the trade was. Family also existed for lineage, so that we can see that still exists today in the British monarchy. You know, it's very important that Prince William has his two sons and daughter, and they can carry on the line and all of that. And yet there are a lot of English people who are saying, you know, it's not relevant anymore for a whole variety of reasons. And maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But the point I wanted to make was family originated for financial reasons. Children were supposed to be helpful to the family. Now, it's interesting, but because we have a lot about individuality today, there was no such thing in former times. You were not an individual. You were a worker bee or a role bee or something like that. And even when I was growing up, so a lot of what defined family was roles. I'm old enough that I was told, basically, even though I was in a college town and they sent me to college and things were changing rather radically, I could be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. Now, I grew up in a college town, university town, that was highly rated. And I remember my mother, who came from Texas, saying to me, you know, you don't have to go to college, honey. You can just start right now and be a secretary. You could be maybe employed at a lawyer's office. You know, I was like, whoa, because even at that time, I'm like, So this whole idea that children as individuals and children as being there not just for the economy of the family is actually quite new. I'd say within the last 3 or 4 decades. And of course, in other parts of the world, it's still the way it used to be. And the other big thing that's been two huge things have been changing and redefining family. One is the roles of men and women, and one is the roles of sexuality, sexualness, gender identification. There are a lot of families now that maybe there's 2 gay men and they're adopting children, or 2 gay women, or there are all kinds of combinations. But that's very different. And it's also different in that there tends to be, there's this new emphasis, and it is new, people, on love. That was never part of family before. Not
Because it
really.
was more like a business
It
kind of.
was a business.
Yeah.
Yes. It
Yeah.
was very practical.
Yeah.
I mean, even with the whole European monarchy, and I don't know that much about it, but I know that they really wanted Prince Charles to marry someone who had some royal blood or some standing, and it was very interesting that William married Kate, who has no royal background.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of things that are changing in society. And you have a lot of backlash from older people often. That's not a family. A family is a heterosexual man and a heterosexual woman. And, although I have been married, I'm just going to currently call myself, with the political situation in America, a childless crazy cat lady, which is, I don't intend to get married again, and I do have a cat. So, but what's happening is all of this stuff is unraveling. And a lot of people are scared, and a lot of people, and it shows up in defensiveness and no, this is the way it should be. And, all of that kind of thing. There's been a lot purity of the line. When I was growing up, it was, I'm not going to say dangerous, but very difficult for, say, a Caucasian person to marry an African-American person. There was a lot of prejudice and a lot of bullying and a lot of that's not the purity of the line kind of thing. So, I think we're in a good era, but there really has been a lot of change in the past 30 to 40 years.
And that's so incredible to actually look at. I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because I grew up very non-traditional, but I'm seeing now as you're talking, Marilyn, I'm like, oh, that was that energy.
Yeah.
Because even though a lot of people might be watching this be like, well, that's not how it is today, but how it was defined is still affecting it as today, even though we are transitioning and changing.
Yes.
But,
yes.
yeah.
And you bring up something so important, thank you, which is energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything is energetic. And if your family spoke the language of prejudice or addiction, that's a whole nother phone call, or anger or depression or superiority, you learn that language as well as you learn to speak English or Spanish or Swahili or French. So you carry that with you. And I know Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness, calls the womb the implantation station, which I think is amazing because you pick up the energy of the mother and the father, which everything's projected onto the mother. Whether it's depression or I don't really want this child, or it's a financial burden or any of those things, you're going to pick up that energy. Most people have no idea how much they were influenced by and are still maybe controlled by the energy, despite what things look like. So that was a great point, Cassy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So Marilyn, how would you say things are changing as far as like family commitments? Because you used to be so committed to your family, right? And I'm seeing a great change there. Could you speak to that a bit?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite topics. Family first, you first.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's been so much energy over the past centuries to put your family first no matter what.
Yeah.
And that, I go back to the financial thing. That sometimes was just very practical. They needed you. They needed you to work on the farm, or they needed you to uphold the royal roles, or they needed you for this and that. Now what it is you need to, for a lot of people, not everybody, fortunately, but you need to subjugate yourself, subjugate your being, and put us first.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened with a lot of that is that people, there's a lot of it is gaslighting. People really have their beings, who they are, denied. And oh no, you can't do that. You can't think that. You can't act that way. As Maxwell's, as Jung's, as whatever. This is how you be. This is how you should behave. It's a total indoctrination and a total disregard for what has been coming out in the last 20 or 30 years, which as an individual, you should have a little bit more say in your life. And there are even things like don't go above your raisin, which is one of the things I've done calls on poverty and the addiction to poverty. Part of that is loyalty to the family. If you come from a family that is, quote, poor, and that's part of the culture. There was this big thing when I was growing up about the man, stand up to the man.
Yes, I know that well.
Yeah. Well, but what's underneath that? Don't ever become like the man, which has a lot of negative connotations. The boss who doesn't treat people well, blah, 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 blah. But it's also, don't ever have money.
Yeah.
Don't ever go for what you desire in life. You belong to this tribe. And I don't just mean tribe in the sense of Africa or anything like that. You belong to the Italian tribe or the Irish American tribe or my family was the intellectual tribe. Oh, save us all from that one, please. But you're not supposed to step out of that, and you're supposed to marry within it. It's interesting. There's a new, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a new Republican coalition for gays for Republicans or something like that. I'm like, I don't know why that seems like an oxymoron these days, but maybe it wasn't if you take the true values. I'm not that first in that. But most people are told they should belong, and we get projected this, we should desire to belong and fit in, rather than the actual awareness of the greatest things that have ever been done in the world have been done by people who don't fit in. Whether it's Picasso or Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or whoever it is. Yes. Scientists, Einstein. The greatest accomplishments in the world are done by people who refuse to be controlled by their, quote, family values or the cultural values or the societal values. Now, unfortunately, the way that sometimes shows up is instead of aligning and agreeing with the family values, people go into resistance and reaction. I'm supposed to wear purple? I'm going to wear black. Or, but that doesn't actually signify any kind of individual being or change. That's just, you're over here, I'm going over here. So I think it's really, really important for people to get to, okay, these were the influences, these are the energies I'm aware of. What would I really like to choose and create as my life and living? And that's a very different question.
It is a very different question. You said something about, I've talked to people that have had this loneliness almost because they're like, well, I am the black sheep. I don't fit in. I went against my family. And there's like this presumption that means then, like, because your family is supposed to love you no matter what. Your family,
and they don't.
Yeah, they don't. There's all these utopian ideals, right? Of like this perfect family. And people are like, well, I didn't have that growing up. So I am now this. I'm alone. I'll always be alone. So could you speak to that a little bit? And what are some possibilities beyond that?
Yes, absolutely. Really good question, because aloneness comes from not being you. When you're truly being you, you're happy being alone. And I've had that journey myself. I was with a friend the other day and she said, do you go out to dinner by yourself? And I'm like, of course. She says, I would never do that. And we had a conversation about that. But because so many children were treated as, if you don't do this, you're wrong.
Yeah.
There's this enormous sense of wrongness. You can't be like this, whatever it is, fundamental religious person, right-wing left-wing radical, hey, that's not me. And if I'm not that, then who am I? I'm nobody. But that's not true. Excuse me. So it's really about total allowance for yourself. And one thing that I always tell people is, okay, start by asking yourself every day, what really matters to me? What are my values? If I'm not looking for others to tell me who to be or what to be, and I'm just going, okay, just me, what do I value? And you can start simply, because people often are never asked to do that and be that. You can even start with, okay, so I'm Chinese, or I'm Italian, or I'm African. What foods do I actually like?
Right.
It sounds so simple,
Yeah.
but yeah, of course I like spaghetti or these curries or whatever. Maybe I don't. Why don't I try something different? Do I like to be in nature? How do I like to move my body? Does my body like to move? What if I weren't a woman or a man or whatever it is? How would I like to show up? Not just looking, but what are my interests? I actually had a woman who was a pediatrician when I was growing up, but that was extremely rare.
Wow.
Fortunately, it's not so rare these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you want to be a stay-at-home dad? Why not? It's really challenging all of these assumptions until you begin to have a sense of, okay, this is me. This is me. And one of the movies that Access recommends is, now I can't think of the name of it, but the Ringling Brothers, the Barnum and Bailey Circus movie.
The
The
greatest show.
Greatest Showman, yeah. Because in there you get these people going, I'm a freak. Wait a minute, this is me. You're
Yeah.
not a freak. This is, and that's can begin the journey of not being lonely. And actually, a lot of the connections you can then begin to make are with people who've also gone, you know what, this is me. I'm not part of this. I don't buy everything in my culture. I don't buy everything from my family, their political status, their views on gender, their views on anything. This is me. When you get with other people who are also, this is me, it's very cool because you can really have allowance. You don't need to fit into their reality, and it may be different than yours. It's not about finding people who are the same reality and belief systems and values and cultures and traditions and behaviors as you. It's about being with people who are like, yeah, I acknowledge your right and your choice to be you, and you acknowledge mine. And if we meet on some areas, that's great. And if we don't meet on other areas, that's great. Nobody needs to change anybody or try to fit them in. So I think that's really, really critical for people.
That is such a different possibility for family.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
Exactly.
remember when 9 years ago now, I think, is when I separated from my husband. So I had my own utopian ideal about what my family was going to be like.
Yes.
And it
Yes.
was going to be better than my family growing up because I was going to, this was
Yeah.
all the things. And so when we separated, and I'm now using the tools of access consciousness, I have a question, I'm like exploring, I started to ask like, what would I want to create? Because I was doing
Yeah.
what he wanted to, like what
Mhm.
his idea of family was. And then I brought in some of my own, but it was kind of like this defined thing. And I was like, oh, like I could actually, no one would know. I could do anything. Like it was like really exciting.
Yes.
And I actually included my kids in that
Yeah.
conversation. They were like 4 and 3, but I all those questions that you were bringing in, Marilyn, I could really see how people could start to ask those questions and start to go, what is family for them? Like, what would they like to create?
Yes, absolutely. And it can look different for every person. And the other thing, when you begin to ask those questions, the other thing that we do that creates difficulty in relationships and family, well, there are many things we do, but one is to assume that the people in our lives have the same definitions of words and the same values as we do. They don't.
Yeah.
I once had a couple come in, because I was a psychotherapist for like 37 years. I once had a couple come in and I'm like, what's going on? And I don't know, it was October or November or something. And they were like, well, we have problems with Christmas. I'm like, Christmas. Okay, what? And it was like, well, for him, the ideal Christmas for him and his wife, and she was expecting, was, but in the early stages,
Yeah.
but so they were about to create a family, was to rent a cabin in someplace like Maine and, maybe do a little cross-country skiing, have fires, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
She was from a big family in Brooklyn, and her idea of Christmas was you go home with 75 relatives and you're always there doing that. But that's what happens with people and couples. So if you really desire clarity about your partners, about the other members of your family, ask a lot of questions about what their paradigm is. What filters are they looking through? What does the word love mean to them? What does the word Christmas mean to them? What does vacation mean to them? What does work mean to them? Because if you can really get that nobody else sees the world the way you do, you can have a much happier life. And
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that people really don't get.
That is so amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you could create so much more intimacy with them.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And your kids can have so much more freedom, or the other people associated. Maybe your family means that 4 couples live together. I don't know. I don't have any point of view about any of it. But
Yeah.
if you can, and a lot of what that means, and this is very radical, is getting rid of right and wrong. What if you can just be an allowance of yourself and the other people, which doesn't mean that you're a doormat. It is asking, does this work for me? And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay too, without the judgment. So this is where I hope families are moving to. This sense of allowance, this sense of being aware that everybody sees the world differently.
Yeah.
You have the right to acknowledge what works for you and what doesn't. And that can, as you just said, Cassy, lead to much greater intimacy with people. So it's not just a practical financial situation.
Yeah.
It's actually a situation of real intimacy and connection.
Yes, please.
Me too.
Yeah. um if you have a little more time, I wanted to
I do, yeah, absolutely.
So what's really popping all of a sudden is you had mentioned roles, and even if someone didn't come from a traditional family, I started to look at, like, I was given the role to be the man of the family.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So when my parents split, I was 8 years old, and I was just kind of energetically given that role. So like if the VCR was fixed, oh, I'm going to fix it. I'll take out the trash. I'll be the man. Like I'll do the,
Wow.
yeah. And I noticed my kids, starting when we split, they tried to take on roles, and I kept trying to like clear their roles because I wanted them to be free to be them. So what can we offer maybe some listeners that are like, wow, I'm aware of the role that I was put in, I don't want it, but not from resistance or reaction? What is available for them to start to explore outside of those roles?
Well, one thing is you can play a role and not believe it's you, and that's really critical.
Yes.
To know that. And maybe you do need to play a role for a little amount of time. But once again, a role is a definition and a solidification. It's not who you are. Question always creates more space and possibilities. You can just start by saying, so if I weren't playing the role of the man of the house, who would I be? What would I be aware of? What would be fun? And I think if we can get people into question rather than answer, that's the big shift. That's the big shift I learned in Access. I learned in working with addiction and recovery. Get out of answer, get out of steps, and get into question. Get into, and that's, if I wasn't desiring to eat a gallon of ice cream, what would I be aware of? It's just like, what's actually going on here? What am I avoiding? What am I looking at? What am I willing to be? What am I not willing to be? Is that creating greater for me or less for me? It is that really learning to be that walking question that can make such a difference.
I love that. And those were some great questions. Thank you. I can
Yeah, you're
really see
welcome.
that like opening up for people and like just exploring those questions in their own universe and
Yes.
goes up for them.
And not judging what comes up. That's the thing. And if you do find yourself judging, oh, I couldn't do that. My parents wouldn't like that. Go, okay, well, so what are the choices here? And what if you didn't worry about what your parents liked and didn't like, which doesn't mean throwing it in their face. It just means I'm doing my own thing here, which is a very different energy.
Yeah.
It's never about resisting and reacting. It's about you being the leader of your life and you going forward, no matter who thinks it's okay or who thinks it's not okay. I have a podcast called the Left Turn Podcast, and that's what it's all about. Cassy's been there. It's all about choices that maybe nobody else agrees, but you know what's true for you, and you follow that.
Beautiful. Yeah. And it's not, and I love what you said, and it's not against the family or against the family commitments. It's actually just for you.
Yes, it's for you.
Yeah. And as we kind of wrap up here, I would say that when I've chosen something like truly for me, not from against or whatever, it creates more for everyone connected to me.
Oh, thank you for that. Absolutely. That's a point I really wanted to make. It's not about, you think that if I do that, I'm going to be selfish. But if you're really following the energy, what's expansive here? It creates more for everybody. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it gives people, it's an inspiration.
Yeah. Well, Marilyn, you're an inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
You're such a gift. And and guys, just so you know, we're talking about family, but you go into like every topic. Like you explore everything. And so I really want to invite people to reach out and go to your website, www.marilynbradford.com. We'll have links, obviously, so you guys don't have to type it all out. Just click the link. And you're always creating classes and exploring this, like the new realms of everything, which is so beautiful, like what else is possible? What else is possible? And so if you guys want more with Marilyn, please check her out. She's got an amazing podcast. We can put links to that too, your website, all the stuff. Anything else that we haven't?
Well, I have another show called The Irreverent Therapists, where I have a friend and we talk about all kinds of crazy topics from a very, very different point of view. We were both in school as clinical social workers. And as I said, I had a private practice. And that's a fun show too. So Cassy, thank you so much. And what about you? What else can people access with you?
Yeah. Well, I've actually been looking at doing some stuff on parenting. So that was interesting. Oh, cool. Family popped up in our, like, what should we talk about? So I'm just wondering, I think both you and I, Marilyn, we are always like in the possibility, like so curious about what is possible. And I actually love that I'm seeing the world evolve and change. Yes. And I love that families are changing. And I know some people might feel afraid or they feel like there's a loss. And what if it's actually not a loss of anything? What if we're creating something different? So I would love to do that with family, with parenting, with all the things.
I bet that would be awesome. Yeah. Really awesome, Cassy. Well, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so grateful. We'll have to do this again because I just adore you. And thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next episode of the Curious Universe podcast. Bye.
Thank you for exploring the curious universe with me. Your curiosity matters. And what if together we could create a greater, more curious world?